About a week or so ago, I made a video titled Could Last Epoch Fail? I was pretty happy with the way it turned out, and it definitely sparked some discussion in the community about the topics that were addressed. After I thought about it for a while though, I think I did miss one pretty important topic, and I want to cover it now. I'm kind of glad I did miss it because I think it really does deserve its own video. It needs some explanation, it needs some examples. So this is our opportunity to do so. The topic is snapshotting, something that the community's been talking about a lot lately. If you're not familiar with snapshotting, don't worry, I'm going to give you some examples, but as a very base understanding, what snapshotting is, it's when the game takes the stats that something has and saves them effectively. It keeps them, it doesn't change them for whatever reason. You can probably imagine where this could go wrong, and you'll see soon enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about specific examples in Last Epoch that snapshotting occurs. We're going to talk about the dev's current position on it, at least as far as we know it or understand it. And then finally, we will discuss how leaving snapshotting as it is could have a profoundly negative effect on the game going forward. And with that, let's go ahead and start with the examples. The first example we'll show is probably one that players are most familiar with, and that is minions. So what we're going to do here is I have myself a Death Knight, so it's a skeletal mage, and we're going to hit the training dummies so that you can see what sort of ailments it is currently proccing, which in this case is poison, and only poison. There is no other ailment that it procs. There's nothing else it has on it stat-wise, so poison is all we get. We're going to stop doing that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to switch out Synathia's Dying Breath for Eric's Bones, which gives Armor Shred to you and your minions. So this guy should get it. All right, but he's snapshotted, right? He is a snapshotted entity. So when we go ahead and begin, there is no Armor Shred to speak of because he's only got the stats from when he was summoned. So we're going to unsummon him. We'll go ahead and take it off the bar. We'll put it back on the bar, summon him back, and now we've got that weapon on, and so he should be getting Armor Shred, and lo and behold, there it is. He now has Armor Shred ailments that he's proccing. Now here's where the real problem arises, is we can now take off that weapon, put the other one back on, hit the train dummy, and he's still getting Armor Shred, even though we don't have Eric's Bones. This is the problem with snapshotting on minions, and why it's a big issue is because this means you can put minion stat gear on, summon all of your minions, take that minion stat gear off, and then put on gear for your own character, and effectively double dip on stats. Here is another one for Acolyte, and it's particularly easy to do. So we're going to use Aura of Decay in this case. We have Aura of Decay spec'd into percent healing on missing health, as well as Armor Shred instead of poison. So those are the two things we're going to track, but this will work with basically anything in Aura of Decay. So Aura of Decay is on our bar. We're going to turn it on. You can see that we're gaining Armor Shred stacks, and we're also shredding the dummy. We can also see that I'm healing, even though I'm using Marrow Shards here to take damage. Now, of course, if I turn it off, all of that stuff will go away. We won't be getting any more Armor Shreds. We won't be healing up anymore. We'll be taking a lot more health loss from Marrow Shards. Okay, so easy fix for this. If you wanted to have 5 skills, this is what people are doing with this right now. You can turn it on, and instead of turning it back off, you just put another skill on. So let's say we'll put Bone Curse on. Cool. Bone Curse is on now. As you can see, Aura of Decay is still there. It's still applying Armor Shred to both me and the target dummy, and it's also still healing me. So this is how you can get a free Aura of Decay on pretty much any build and use another skill, which is certainly not what you would hope to have happen when it's supposed to be a 5-skill system. For the next 2 examples, we're going to use a Primalist. We'll start with one that was taken advantage of quite a bit recently in a tournament. So Earthquake is a really strong ability right now, especially with Werebear. EQ Werebear is the current meta. Now, I currently have this build spec'd into Earthquake, so we have it available to us, and it's on my bar, and I can use it. I also have it spec'd 10 points, 11 points in which gives me seismic tide, which is what's causing the 3 earthquakes to go off. So we can tell that it's spec'd because we got the 3 earthquakes instead of 1, which is what we would have if we didn't have it spec'd. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, oh, by the way, I should also point out we have Buldar's Wrath on, which means that we can use it on movement. So there's the movement ability. We're going to now spec 1 point out of Shaman, which currently has 15, which is just enough to give us Earthquake. So we're going to take 1 point out. And as you can see, Earthquake is no longer unlocked, according to this. It is also now no longer on our skill bar, and we can't pull it up anywhere. There's nowhere to access it. But it is not removed from the skills and specializations, so I still have all of my points into it. What does this mean? This means that Buldar's Wrath, when it procs it, will still get the skills and specs. In fact, when we do it, you can see, there it is. We still have the 3 earthquakes, which means this was snapshotted in. If I was to play Werebear, I can fully take advantage of Earthquake with no problems whatsoever. And I don't have to put the points in. I have to put them in 1 time just to get the skill, put it on the skills and spec bar, and then I'm done. I can take them all back out. Why is this important? Because oftentimes the passives in one tree aren't as good as another one. In this case, that's particularly true. For example, if I took all the points out of here and put them into Beastmaster, I would get significant damage reduction from something like Aspect of the Boar, which would allow me to push further in the arena and other content. So what I'm basically doing here is getting a free skill without any of the investment that I'm supposed to get into that skill. The last example is maybe even a little bit weirder. It's kind of like the minions, but also different in that minions will snapshot everything. So if you put on a piece of gear that is minion specific, they will get all of the stats off of that, and then you can switch it out freely. That doesn't happen with transformation skills though. If I were to put on, for example, increased melee damage while transformed, I'm going to go ahead and transform. So I've got my increased melee damage, transform back out just to show you that I'd lost it before. There we go. 1 more time. There it is, 358. Now I take this off and it removes the increased melee damage. Now, because minions aren't on your character sheet, they don't seem to follow these rules. The character sheet, by the way, on minions does actually update, but they're just not paying attention to that because they're already snapshotted in. Not the case for transformation, but not all skills are on your character sheet, or I should say all stats. For example, Hermode's Cage has multiple stats that won't show up there. Well, 2 really. It's got the last 2. The other ones are all going to show up there, but the last 2 will not. So if we were to put on Kermode's Cage and go back in, you can see that we are a white bear now. Now, if I were to take this off, I'm still a white bear. So that's clearly snapshotting in. Doesn't matter though, it's completely inconsequential. What's not inconsequential, though, is the 2 rage gained on kill in werebear form. So what I have done is I have taken off anything on Druid that would give me rage any other way. So no rage on crit. In werebear form, I didn't take any of the rage gains. So there's only one source I could possibly get rage from, and it would be Kermode's Cage. With that, we're going to go ahead and go into a timeline. And I'll show you that I'm still getting rage. Even though I'm not wearing the item. Although the other stats are not snapshotting. For whatever reason, this stat is. So here we are. We are in the Echo. And I'm just going to use swipe to make it clear that I'm gaining back the rage, because Earthquake would make it hard to see. This is only a level 55 timeline, which is intended. I'll kill things quicker. You see my rage is going up as things are dying. Again, there's nothing else on my character right now that could cause this to happen. It's purely from that chest unique that I'm not actually wearing, that I took off after I transformed. And I can use that alone, in this particular example at least, to maintain my rage. Look at that big hit of rage there. Big hits of rage because I'm killing a lot of enemies in a short period of time while in werebear form. Thanks to the chest armor I'm not actually wearing anymore. So there you have it. That's what it looks like, with partial snapshots from the transformation skills. So this is supposed to be the part where I cover EHG's side of the story, so to speak, where they are with snapshotting, what they know about it, how they feel about it, what their plans are, if any, to do something about it in the future. And I spent a lot of time trying to do exactly that. I did a lot of recording. I went through a lot of Mike's dev stream to cover the topic because he's really the only source we have, which is part of the problem, which I'll get to in a minute. But ultimately, I didn't feel like I was presenting it in a way that I was comfortable with. It felt like it was a little bit too judgmental and not really getting to the core of what EHG actually feels about it, because we don't really know how EHG feels about it, where they are with it, what their priorities are with it. And that's because they haven't said much. Mike is really our only source on where they are, and him musing about it on a dev stream while trying to play the game and just taking questions while he's playing over a 2-hour period doesn't feel like the best sourcing to use. So here's what I'm going to say on it. From what we know, which is very little, it's not clear whether or not they'd consider snapshotting a priority right now. It's not clear whether or not they'll have it fixed by 1.0. It's not clear whether or not they understand all of the problems of the system. So it would be great if we could get more of an official stance from EHG on where they are with snapshotting, because it is a problem, and I hope these examples show that. If it's not clear yet, though, what I'm going to do now is go into 4 different ways that I think snapshotting are a problem for the game, that if they were to stay like this for 1.0, would be substantially harmful to the game's growth, the game's success. So from here on out, that's what we'll do. 4 reasons why, and that's how we'll end the video, and hopefully we'll hear from EHG at some point in the future to get their side of the story. The first issue with snapshotting is it's just not fun. It's not fun to have to manage things in the way that some of these snapshotting mechanics require, particularly when it comes to minions. Having to switch out gear over and over is just not a good experience. Sure, you don't need to do it except for every once in a while, but if your minions die enough, every time they do, you've got to take out your gear and put it back on. And that's not a very fun experience. And one of the fixes that EHG seems to have for it, by causing your minions to re-snapshot every map, is only going to make this worse. I think most players, if they went that way, won't do it. It's just not worth it. But if you think about, for even bossing, for if you have a boss fight, a really particularly challenging fight, if they do it the way they want to, you can just snapshot that fight, and your problem is still there, because the player is going to gain significantly more power by doing so, even if it's just for that one map, that one boss fight. So this is a problem that, if it's tackled the way they have so far, is going to not solve this issue. It's going to maybe make it a little bit better for general players, but you're still going to be enticed to do this sort of gear swapping, even when you can only do it once per map. For a lot of players, it's also just not particularly fun to do something that you know is not really by design. Like, you know, you're kind of cheesing the system, and most players, I think, or at least a large number of players, would rather just play the game the way it's supposed to be played. Like, we know we're not supposed to have 6 skills. We know we're not supposed to have 2 armor sets. But when that is an option, and when not taking that option makes you have a weaker character, it feels like you're either cheesing or you're playing a weaker version of whatever build it is, and that's not a very good option for players to have. The second reason is because it's never going to be balanced around these snapshot mechanics. The game is just never going to balance for it, because it was not by design that this happens. The game is just not designed to do these things, and so EHG is never going to design for them. They're never going to make it so that the game is balanced around you having 2 sets of armor, or you taking passive points and pulling them out, or you having 6 skills. That's just never going to happen. And if you're not going to balance around these things because they're unintended, then they shouldn't be in your game. This one just feels a little bit obvious to me, because if you don't feel like you should balance around something because you don't want it to be part of your game, you don't want it to be something that people do, then it probably shouldn't be there in the first place, because otherwise people are doing something that you are not actively balancing around, so you're not consciously trying to make sure it's not overpowered. Well, then it's probably going to be overpowered. The third one, which is very closely related to the second one, is it upsets competitive balance. When you have a game that has competitive aspiration, it's got a leaderboard, it's got an arena system that's all about pushing as far as you can go, having these sorts of systems in there forces competitive players to choose those options, those things that you didn't intend for, instead of playing the game quote unquote legitimately, like most of those players would probably like to. Most competitive players want to play the game as legitimately as possible. They don't want to cheat. That's anti-competition. And so when you do these sorts of things, which are technically not cheating by EHG's own standard, they feel like they're forced to do it, but it also feels like cheating. Like it feels like cheating. This is a situation that Lizard IRL, a streamer and a very competitive player, has found himself in recently. By the way, I didn't ask him if I could talk about this. I figure he'll be okay with it because it's something he talks about a lot lately, where he has started to do some of these snapshot mechanics because he wants to make sure that he can win. And so he needs to do the things that everyone else is doing. And since these things are not considered cheating by EHG, therefore they're not cheating by the rules of the tournaments that we run, the community tournaments we have, everyone else is doing them, and if he decides not to do them, he will probably not win when he otherwise would. So he started doing these so that he can be competitive in the tournaments, which is what all he wants to do. He just wants to be competitive, and he doesn't want other people to have significant advantages over him because they're using cheese mechanics. Well, he has no option here. He has to use them, or he has to not be as competitive. And so he's using them because he wants to compete. I don't think this is a choice that players should have to make that want to be competitive. There should not be a choice of cheese or not be competitive. But this is where we're at. When you have these sorts of systems that are not by design, but are also not being removed from the game, they're just kind of sitting there. Players are figuring them out. Players know how to use them to their advantage. And if you don't keep up with that, you're not competitive. This is something that for competitive reasons must be removed for the game. If for no other reason alone, if this is the only one that grasps someone's attention, it should be this. Competitive play will be destroyed by these mechanics. Players that want to be competitive will feel like they have to do it, and it's going to look terrible if this is the way that players are doing things in a competitive environment just by avoiding playing the game the normal way because they have to. All right, last reason to get this stuff out of here by 1.0. We're going to specify 1.0 on this one because that's when everything hits the fan, so to speak. 1.0, as we talked about in my last video on ways that Last Epoch could fail, is when all of the people come to watch the game, to check out the game, to play the game, to stream the game. That's when everyone is here. That's when all of the eyes are on Last Epoch. And if all of this stuff is still in the game, just as we talked about with competition and with not feeling like you're falling behind others, you better believe that people like content creators and streamers are going to feel the pressure to play the game in an efficient manner. That's how they are used to playing it. PoE streamers play efficient builds, or else they get criticized for not playing efficiently. And so when they come over to Last Epoch, they're going to do the same. And if efficient means you should snapshot, you should do these things that are not really intended, that means people are seeing that. Like thousands and thousands of people are watching big streamers, big content creators play the game in a way that is not by design. Is that the way that the game should be presented at 1.0? A bunch of people playing the game in a way that is not intended. To me, that's just a really bad look. And I think it will get a lot of backlash, a lot of criticism. And a lot of people, frankly, will mock the game if that happens. People already mock the fact that there's snapshotting in the game and that this is a more efficient way of playing. That's only going to get worse at 1.0. If that is what the game looks like at 1.0, whatever negative feedback on the snapshotting occurs now is only going to get projected. And if, God forbid, if there are highly competitive ways of playing at 1.0, there's going to be a season, right? There's going to be a cycle. If there's some sort of tournament that's put on by EHG or some other way that players are encouraged to be highly competitive early on, and the winner of that is someone who used snapshotting, good luck. Good luck with the blowback on that one. It's not going to look pretty. So this needs to be resolved by 1.0 if the launch of the game wants to be as positive as possible and avoid having it tarnished by the snapshotting problems that currently exist. All right, that wraps up everything for this video on snapshotting. I hope it makes it more clear to players why snapshotting is a problem, what specifically those problems are, where they're getting in the way of play currently, and what impact they could have if they're not resolved, especially by 1.0. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more content from me, I also stream 5 to 6 days a week. That's actually the primary thing that I do. Would love to have you there. We also have a Discord where we have an active community that talks about this game and others. I also do have a Patreon for those who would be interested in further supporting me making these videos and streaming this content. I am doing this full time right now. I would like to do that forever, but I will do so as long as I can. Any support that I get from the community, it makes a huge difference for my ability to continue to do this now in the future. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great time in Last Epoch, and I'll see you all again real soon.